The Maine was not exploded by the Spain. That word didn't work, did it? The rat doesn't understand simple. The rat has bigger issues. Thank you. So, Spain, and they drew him as a monster. No, it was almost certainly coal dust that blew it up in the furnace, but Spain did it. Here is, because that's what everyone said, and soon the battle cry became, remember the Maine and to hell with Spain. Remember the Maine and to hell with Spain. And that pen, it was eventually drug out pretty far in Havana Harbor. That mass is at Arlington National Cemetery. I guess the Maine is a really popular area for scuba divers when they go down to Havana. They go through the wreck. I guess wrecks are really good for scuba diving. And that's the funeral procession through the streets of New York City. And so the drumbeat for war, the jingoism was getting big, getting huge. And here's another one. Remember the Maine, and then don't forget the starving Cubans. So they bring back the reconcentration camps, even though by then the reconcentration camps were basically closed down. Hannah was reluctant to go to war. Business interests were reluctant to go to war. And then it hit them. Right after the Maine was exploded, I guess they could do the math. Wow, if the U.S. becomes an empire, they're going to need a lot of ships, steel, uniforms, food, AKA really lucrative government contracts. And business interests changed their mind on the war, and therefore Hannah changed his mind on the war, therefore McKinley changed his mind on the war, and 2 months afterwards, McKinley asked Congress for a declaration of war. Business interests, wars make the market insecure, but business interests turn, they realize right away, oh, we can make a lot of money out of this. So that's from Hertz, New York World. And they sent out a levy where they basically put out a quota for each state for recruits. So they have to get from volunteers and their National Guard. They accidentally added an extra 0 to Montana. So Montana sent a disproportionately large number of troops to this war. A lot of troops. They did not have to do conscription. There was a huge wave of volunteers. It's like, we don't want to miss the fun of this wonderful war. Now here is Undersecretary of State Theodore Roosevelt. And Roosevelt, 1898. Roosevelt wants to go fight, desperately wants to go fight. He is an up-and-coming politician. His father hired a substitute during the Civil War. He wanted the glory and the fame. But his last order that he personally sent from his office, even though it had to come up from the top, and he could not make this order as Undersecretary of State, but it came from his office, so he could take the credit, was sending out to a U.S. naval squadron to bring the war to Spain, to attack Spain. So, what place is this whole war about? Cuba. So naturally the United States attacked where? Cuba, right? No, the Philippines. The United States attacked the Philippines first. If there's any doubt what this war was about, it was empire. The Philippines was also a Spanish colony. There was an insurrection against Spanish rule. The U.S. wanted the Philippines. Remember Alfred Thayer Mahan. If you're going to protect sea bases, the Philippines, or protect trade, the Philippines is in a great location. It can protect America's interests in China. There's other lucrative potential trade areas all around Asia. And it's right south of Japan. Japan was a growing power. The U.S. had their squadron. They had to rent it from the British in their colony of Hong Kong. Took them a few days to steam down. The American Navy was much more modern. This is some of the best ships in the United States Navy. Both sides had 17 ships, but the Spanish ships, most of them were still iron armored, which is not near as strong. Some of them still had black powder weapons. So the range was 1/10, and even had wooden frames. It was not even a match. The United States fleet steamed in basically without warning to the Spanish and attacked them right in Manila Bay. Commodore Thomas Dewey would become the first big hero of the war. I know all of you are thinking, I want to see a picture of Commodore Dewey. I want to see a picture of Commodore Dewey. I looked him up, and that's the picture that came up. Mickey Rat. Notice the resemblance?
Oh, yeah.
This is what he really looked like. And everyone thought he would be president. I mean, he smashed the fleet. Then he made some offhanded remark that being a president wouldn't be that hard, and he kind of disappeared. People want the idea, at least the president's supposed to be a hard job. And the Spanish would be defeated. It would be 3 more months before there's any kind of U.S. forces that could sail across the Pacific to take the Philippines. The Filipino insurrection movement thought the Americans were there to liberate them so they could be independent. The joke would be on them in a very horrible way. The U.S. wanted it. Now back to Cuba. So the United States had a tiny army. It's only, almost forgot one thing. When the war began, an amendment to the first appropriations or spending bill was called the Teller Amendment. And there's immediately the cry of, this is just a war for empire. The U.S. wanted to make it appear like it's not a war of conquest. And therefore, Cuba would be independent. But you notice I put a question mark there. What's independent mean? I bet there's lots of definitions of independence. It never said anything about the other areas. It never said anything about the Philippines. Everybody was focused on Cuba, but not Guam, Philippines, or Puerto Rico. 3 other Spanish colonies. So here's a picture, and it's showing Spain. And so Spain is like a villain in a vaudeville performance. And you remember the colors, villains in black. Here's the hero in white, and they have Cuba as the heroine. And look at the face. I've already done this before. Notice how they draw her face. They want the people to be sympathetic to defend the Cubans. Even though, remember, the whole thing was about Spain. Here's another one. Here's the United States defending poor Cuba from Spain. Look at her face. It's not that same face that was taken up San Juan Hill in that social Darwinism poster I showed you on Wednesday. And say, may we save me from my friends, implying that Spain is trying to act like a friend by means of colonial master. The United States Army was only 28,000 men. Most of it was scattered in bases all over the West. They would eventually have 250,000 men in uniform. So that means National Guards and volunteers. And boy, did a lot of people volunteer. These were temporary volunteers. They called it the Volunteer Army. And the U.S. regular Army, their uniform had changed a little bit since the Civil War. They're still wearing navy blue tops, khaki bottoms. The regular uniforms were cotton, but the National Guardsmen still had wool uniforms. So the thousands of Montana National Guardsmen who went had nice blue wool uniforms, which, as we all know, is perfect for the jungle because it keeps the heat out, right? Once again, science. The U.S. did not have any machine guns like other modern powers were buying. They still had Gatling guns from the Civil War. They were still black powder, short range, but they fired a 58 caliber bullet. If anybody knows anything about bullets, you know that's a huge bullet. That would actually have an impact down the road. But the U.S. had good artillery, better trained. Oh, they had a good bolt-action modern rifle called the Craig. The only problem with it would jam in humid weather. That will be a problem.
No.
The Spanish actually had better weapons. They had German rifles and French machine guns. But their morale was horrible. I should add the Spanish wore white uniforms. White cotton uniforms and straw hats. Okay, not great camouflage, but much better in the jungle. This war and the British Boer War is going to convince everybody we can't go around wearing bright colored uniforms anymore with modern weapons. By World War I, everybody except the French will begin to change. The French were desperate to prove how brave they were by having their poor men wear red and blue uniforms. The first soldiers that arrived at Tampa were black soldiers. So they still were calling these regiments colored regiments, including the troops from Missoula that were there to put down strikes. The thought was black soldiers would be less susceptible to yellow fever. And that was a racialized mix. It was not true at all. But they sent the troops down there. That's going to lead to what's called the Tampa riot, even though it would be called a race riot. Black soldiers went out in Tampa. They went out on leave and were assuming they would be treated as equals because they're fighting for the country. Many of them were from the South, but in those 15 years before this, especially the 10 years, what were those laws that segregated the South called?
Jim Crow.
The Jim Crow law. And some were arrested or harassed for going into bars or taverns that were supposed to be for white people. And they began to fight back, and mobs of white men began to roam the streets attacking black soldiers. And who's going to be punished for this? Yeah, the black soldiers. A few of them will be court-martialed and sent to hard labor. And so they showed the situation it was in the Army, how only 70 said this was the most racist time in history. Well, Teddy Roosevelt formed his own regiment. He was allowed to do this. Friends in high places. The Secretary of War Elijah Root said, "Do what you want." So it's going to be a regiment of dandies from New York City, and also cowboys from the West, all white, even though the majority of cowboys were probably mostly of African descent. But anyways, here's a picture of them. This is right after the taking of Alcani Ridge, one of the last battles of the war. They were partially involved, but you're going to see a lot of dramatic pictures like this, in buckskin, riding up the hill. Completely untrue. That was not at all, this is the myth of Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was an up-and-coming politician, and both the Herald and the World and other newspapers sent a reporter just to follow Roosevelt. He gave great interviews, he was a quote machine. So everything he did, let me rephrase that, everything he said he did was reported back in the United States. And he is going to become a major hero. And of course, this might shock you, really exaggerated what he did. Especially the charge up San Juan Hill, and the charge cavalry riding their horses up the hill. They didn't have room on the ships for their horses, so they walked. That's like one of many myths. But he would ride this to become governor, vice president, and then president. Ride? Yeah, even though they didn't have horses. So, what about the invasion of Cuba? Havana's the capital of the colony, but the main Spanish naval base is in Santiago. And the Spanish army, they had a lot of troops there, but the morale was terrible. And the U.S. Navy was stronger, they could blockade it. They really don't have a chance. The only chance the Spanish have is just hold out as long as possible. And the U.S. knows if we take their main naval base, they can't survive. They will sue for peace. So that's the plan. So they loaded up in Tampa, and they didn't know what they were doing. No one in the United States had led an amphibious operation since the Civil War, and all the commanding officers hadn't commanded anything bigger than a 500-man regiment. And now they're commanding thousands of soldiers. They loaded the ships wrong. They did everything wrong. They forgot enough whaleboats. They're the big rowboats. They didn't have enough ships to transfer the horses, as I told you before. When you load a ship for an invasion, for anything you want to unload fast, the things you need first, like ammunition, when do you load them on the ship? Last. They loaded them first because it was heavier and it thought it'd be better ballast. So they got all the gear they didn't need first. Just stupid little things like that from not thinking and being in haste. And so when they landed, here's Santiago, surrounded by hills, Kettle, San Juan, El Cani Ridge. It's right here. Here's Havana. When they landed here, it was chaos. Fortunately, there weren't any Spanish there to stop them. For example, to get the horses and mules they needed to pull their supplies, cavalry walked. They didn't have enough boats. So how did they get the horses and the mules ashore? Pushed them overboard. And they had someone there on the shore blowing a bugle, hoping they had been in the army long enough, these animals, that they would go to the bugle. But a lot of the animals had been bought just before the war began. So a number of them decided to swim to Venezuela. I hope they're still going. The point is, it didn't go very well. But the Spanish didn't really resist. Here, dramatic shots of them going past the Spanish garrison. You can see the navy blue. Here they're gearing a blanket, kind of like Civil War, like Sherman's army in the West. And when they got to the main defensive line, the heaviest fortified line was at San Juan Hill. Now, the Rough Riders actually were part of the charge up nearby Kettle Hill. But San Juan Hill was the biggest one. It had a fort on top, stone fort, old Spanish fort. And it shows the Spanish in their white uniforms. And there was an attack by 2 infantry regiments. Now, Teddy Roosevelt would claim, I saw they were going nowhere. And I personally ran over and they weren't his command, but took over and led them up the hill. No, that's not at all what happened, but it was taken by storm. The big bullets of the Gatling guns hit the stone wall in front where the Spanish were, and the big bullets hit the rocks, and they splintered into the eyes of the Spanish soldiers. And the Spanish soldiers, the morale was bad, and a lot of them just said, you can just imagine, heck with this, and they just took off. And those actually, therefore, were decisive. One more thing. So 2 regiments did take the most important Spanish fortification. This is one of the few accurate watercolors of it. And what do you notice about those soldiers? Yeah? They what? They were what they called the colored regiments. They were African Americans. Those were the 2 regiments. Now, Roosevelt would say, I helped those cowardly blacks up the hill. And how racist they were. And he didn't do that at all, but that's what he said, to try to take credit and say, see, I did it. And pretty horrific thing to say, but he got the credit for it. San Juan Hill fell. They made postcards of it. This is one of the postcards where they had a photo and then they colored it so you can see the blown fortification. El Caney Ridge with nearby fell. And once that happened, the Spanish forces were doomed. The Spanish forces could not remain in Santiago. Their fleet tried to make a break for it and were stopped, and that was it. The war ended really fast, at least this part, yeah, 1898. It's all within a couple months. It happened so fast. Santiago fell. Thomas Edison, remember him? The guy who did the first photograph? The next year, he made a dramatic film of Teddy Roosevelt up San Juan Hill and El Caney Ridge. I don't have the San Juan Hill, but they showed this in vaudeville films, vaudeville theaters, and they played dramatic piano music in the back. I'm going to show you this, and you're going to be shocked how accurate they were able to get the jungle of Cuba in New Jersey. In fact, some of you probably have not seen footage this realistic in a long time. Just be ready. This is a dramatization. It's not the real thing. It's not the real thing, everybody. Look at the charge. Look at the jungle. They're really going uphill, and then they fire. And everyone watched, and they go, wow! They just were in awe of this. Yeah, that's it. Okay. I should add, they're using black powder muskets because smokeless powder didn't make enough smoke, and so they went with it. Pretty exciting? You feel like you're there?
Yeah.
Wait. Fire. And then the cavalry charge. Okay. Now I know what else you're thinking. Well, I want to see more Edison film from the same year. You want to see some more?
Yes.
All right. Oops. Observe this. This was also filmed by Edison. Cats boxing.
That's the best. I love that so much.
Okay, by the way, the cats are being held and harnessed. So you know this man is a sociopath. Okay, so you want to see one more thing?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing. cat waking up a little puppy. Isn't this cute? But that's smack. All right. That made me laugh. Poor puppy. Cat's a little wake up. Whack. All right, here we go. So the Spanish-American War, you notice I put part 1. Lasted just a couple months. 385 American soldiers were killed, just a few hundred were wounded. And you'll also notice, though, significantly more died of disease or other illnesses. Over 15,000 would be hospitalized because of disease. Yellow fever was the big killer, but there's something else too in just a second. But to people who didn't have to go fight the war, like Secretary of State John Hay, he would call this a splendid little war. A splendid little war. You always notice when people who don't actually have to fight and die, they might have different opinions than those who actually have to go through it. But half of the American soldiers died of food poisoning. This is the first time that large numbers of soldiers were eating that processed food that was coming out of the canneries and slaughterhouses. Sure, people were getting sick, but they didn't know it was from the food. When the war began, all these slaughterhouses and packing houses had been storing food that wasn't sold. So meat, they put in the basement, not refrigerator, just put in the basement to kind of spoil and petrify. And then when the war began, they brought it up because the U.S. Army needed canned food. It seems like a great thing for soldiers. You know, canned food, it would preserve it much better than packing salt pork. But they just took up this petrified, vague, spoiled meat, ground it up, and then why do you think there's gravy and stuff? It covers the smell and the look of the food. If you put brown gravy, everything looks brown. And they didn't know what they were eating. And all these men were getting sick. And you combine the food poisoning with the yellow fever, that deadly combination would cause a couple thousand people to die. So I know what you're saying, but we like Spam. Yes, so I thought I'd show you Spam cakes and Spam wrapped around bananas. Doesn't that look good? I shouldn't have shown, I already mentioned we're hungry. Now you guys are really hungry. So the Treaty of Paris of 1898, Cuba would be independent. Spain would sign this, but remember, it requires 2/3 of the Senate to ratify. The U.S. got Puerto Rico and Guam, and then they paid $20 million for the Philippines. So the U.S. could claim it's not a war for empire. And the U.S. empire then has grown dramatically. As in Puerto Rico, Guam, and Spain. They did Spam. I had Spam on my head, so I forgot I did that. They paid Spain, not Spam. For the Philippines. Anyone catch that? You should start writing Spain too. So, does this remind you of another little war that the United States fought for conquest and then paid about $18.3 million? Isn't this just like the Mexican War? Just like it. So the U.S. could claim it's not for empire. And now the United States is a worldwide empire and exploded on the world scene. The U.S. already was for its industrial might, but this would be even bigger. So Mexican War, here's signing the treaty, but now it requires 2/3 of the Senate. 2/3 of the Senate to ratify a treaty. That's in the Constitution. It's very hard to ratify a treaty then. Here's a cartoon now showing the growing American empire. Now look at the faces. Remember I showed you those earlier faces and how they drew them to be sympathetic? Now it's to justify conquest. Hurrah, the 4th of July. We're coming on Independence Day celebrations too. Look at the face of Cuba. The Philippines, and I told you Hawaii was annexed just while the war was going or ending in the euphoria. Those are now different faces. Those are the same faces used to justify slavery, to justify Jim Crow, social Darwinistic faces to say they can't govern themselves. Here's another one of McKinley like a schoolmaster, sweating, hot, miserable, but it's like the white man's burden to go teach his new class. And look at the faces of Cuba, Hawaii, Philippines, and look at Puerto Rico. And remember that ad I showed you of Pear soap the other day? Soap. Have you used it? Implying uncivilized, dirty, and we will treat them. Now they need to be colonized. They need our help. How could you let them govern ourselves? It's our duty. So there was an anti-imperialist league. And there were a lot of Americans opposed to this. Just like the Mexican War. And Samuel Gompers, the head of the AFL, Mark Twain, who was probably the most famous author in America by this time. A lot of you probably had to read Huckleberry Finn for class. Anyone have to read that one? Yeah. And Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie was an interesting guy. We know about what he did at Homestead, but he also offered to buy the Philippines for $10 million and give them their independence. He was just an interesting man. People are complex. And of course, William Jennings Bryan was an anti-imperialist. And they didn't want the Philippines, and therefore they're against the ratification. If the treaty's not ratified, this could change everything. They have to renegotiate a new treaty with Spain, and maybe the Philippines can be independent. The United States will be tainted by empire, regardless of what happened in the American West. What were the reasons? Well, first one, this was Carnegie's big reason. This was Bryan's big reason. Self-determination. The United States should stand for this. And that means this was a term being used by going into this century. Let them decide their own fate, just as the colonies decided their own fate. Now, of course, the United States did not do that in the American West, but they're saying now, this will be huge. Woodrow Wilson will claim the U.S. entered World War I for self-determination of the European people. But there's also just racism. Are we going to allow these people of different colors to be in our country and steal our jobs? Are they going to be equal citizens? Are now Filipinos going to come over and take our jobs, or Cubans or Puerto Ricans? And so there was an element of racism. And then one more thing. Empire means war. Empire means colonies for profit. Is this just going to be for corporate influence? Are we going to go to war now for banks? Are we going to go to war for American companies to get rich? Is that what's going to happen? So they can take advantage of countries that the United States has conquered? Would they be right about that? Oh, wait till we get the big sick diplomacy tomorrow. But, I'll put this up tomorrow. We're not, the bell's ring. So, preach just a little bit more tomorrow, and then bring the jungle. How much time do you guys have for the jungle? Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of time in class tomorrow to work out when I'm done with big sick diplomacy is my plan, and also, because I want to be here to answer some questions and be a few other things to go. And I'm going to assign something from the review book.
Is it just reading it, or is it, are there questions?
There'll be some things you have to do with it. But I'm going to give it tomorrow. So I originally was going to make it due on Wednesday. I'm going to change it. So don't worry about it. I'll give it tomorrow. I'll give you time.
And then
The jungle will be due on Friday.
oh, it's on Friday.
Goodbye, everybody. People did very well on the test. You did very well. Huh? I can tell you your score. But I literally just, because I wasn't here yesterday to do the rest of the
That was such an evil laugh. Did you stop this? I just walked right in front of it. Greta. Oh, I hope she just cackled at the thing.
I know. Oh, you did.
I don't think I want to know.
I don't want to know, but I really want to.
Oh my goodness.
But yours don't matter. No, very good. Very well done.
Dang. Bam.
You too.
That's so good. 100. How do you do it? Do you write them all down?
66.
Oh, at 70. Okay, I was
No,
like,
he said 70.
I don't know
and he
if
was
I
like,
wanna
out
know.
of 70.
I think that's the worst till 55.
65.
Yes. What? Damn. Wow.
Thank you for bringing that chair, and I really appreciate it.
Oh my God.
Huh? You have to do a short ID for each one.
Oh shoot! I threw all the points into one.
No,
short
we
ID.
gotta do 3.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what you do. Be in class tomorrow for it.
Okay.
Yeah, which one did you do?
The first one. Not the third one.
A, that's 3 seconds, B, 3 seconds.
All right.
Not a big, it's whatever. I know you wrote it down, it's not a big deal, we'll get it solved. Hey, let's do a quiz! Yes, you got, let's do the quiz one, let's get the test on that. So drop, I think there's a desk out there. You need paper, a pen to write the short ID. Did we get the bat boy yesterday? Or by last, okay, good. Why is it there? That's why. Yeah.
Now bed.
They're family members, other family members. What the hell are you doing?
Mackenzie's was gone, so I was playing.
Oh. All right. So I was not here on Monday. But, see, who else has to do class? I think, yeah, you did yours on Friday, yeah, okay. Put it there. Don't whine. Okay, for number 13.
Oh, why did you see this one?
All right. Was anyone gone yesterday besides me? So we got, and the triangle short waves fire worked okay for everybody. I hope that video was, I really liked that video, even though it's, and it's, I cut it out of another thing so it could fit in half the class period. We have a really good one on the triangle short waves fire from American Experience, but it's like an hour, so it doesn't quite fit. You did.
I did, yeah.
Awesome. Did you get this?
I did.
Take that. And I'll take that. Did you like the video? It was. It was sad, yeah. But the whole point is, about regulation and stuff. Yeah, I hope. Yeah. Yeah, just give me a second. And I got really nothing. Tomorrow. Half sheet of paper number 1, 2. You want to go 9? Should you just do 9? Who's with me on 9? Anybody else needs a packet from you? Or the jungle will not be due until Friday. I knew that you'd only get a couple minutes at the end of class. Is that all right? You didn't have any time at all to work on this. My plan is tomorrow to give you a little bit of time in class, and I'm going to talk about it, and maybe some time on Thursday. There's basically we're going to do the review book on Wednesday. And I'm assigning 421 to 437, but on Wednesday, we're going to do some stuff in class out of it. So don't worry about it till class. So on Wednesday and Thursday. I'm going to try something a little bit different for time reasons. Want to do the quiz now? All right. Any questions? I'll answer any question. Any question you have. Answer number 1. Try, just throw this out here. Try wombat. Anything else?
How old are
How old am I? Far too old.
you? Even numbers.
But young and or relatively spry for being so old.
What was an event?
I'm old enough to retire.
that happened?
Yes.
What was an event that happened during your birth year?
My birth year, the Battle of Hastings, 1066. The Normans conquered Anglo-Saxon Britain.
You're young.
I know, I hope vitamin C. Lots of vitamin C, 10 to 15 pounds of vitamin C an hour. Anything else? Huh?
What wars have you been in?
Okay. I thought you were gonna ask questions about the quiz. You just want to hear about my life. I don't blame you. My life is Spanish War. Who else wants to hear more about my life? Hear more about me. Even though you're also going to be just doing the old student trick. Hey, if we ask him questions about himself, he won't give us the quiz. Yeah, no one has ever done that in the history of school. Yeah, one of my teachers had a son in West Point, so we would just go, hey, how's Chris doing in West Point? That was half the class. All right. Huh? Come on. She went to school. CPA. Would you like a bonus question? Would you like a bonus question? Who was the American president when the Spanish-American War began? It should be really easy. I'll give you a hint. It's not Washington or Biden. See? Now there's a few presidents in the middle you might have to figure out. Just a couple. And I also know what you're thinking of our last two presidents. Both were probably senior citizens during the Spanish-American War. When you're done, turn it over. Teddy Roosevelt claimed to charge up San Juan Hill. We all know who really charged up San Juan Hill, don't we? The goat of liberty, charging up San Juan Hill. Don't forget the rat. There might have been a monkey involved. And Bat Boy. Oh, I filmed this all. The camera was still running.